Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Wednesday, November 12th, and it's our privilege and pleasure to have with us today in our virtual studio Austyn Gaffney, who is an environmental writer for VTDigger and also an instructor at the Community News Service at the University of Vermont. Before she began writing for VTDigger, she was a climate fellow at the New York Times. Before that, she was a freelance writer based in Louisville, Kentucky, where she reported award-winning stories for several publications, including Rolling Stone and The Washington Post. Austyn, great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, I've been a reader of your writing and reporting at VTDigger now for a while, and always been very impressed by your stories. Very well written and always very interesting. And I guess just to get started, how did you wind up a Digger? You had been at the Times, and what happened? You got an opportunity to come up to Vermont?
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want to come to Vermont? But I was working at the New York Times. I was, as you mentioned, a fellow on their climate desk. So that means I was reporting with their climate reporters for 2024 into 2025. And as my fellowship was ending, I knew I wanted to stay in a newsroom. I knew I wanted to stay with community news, move more into local news. And so I found this position with VTDigger.
And tell us a little bit about the Community News Service. That's been around now for a couple of years. I remember doing an interview back, I want to say, really near the start of the COVID pandemic. And it was just beginning to launch then. But what is it all about? What happens with the Community News Service?
Yeah, so the Community News Service, also known as the Center for Community News, basically what it does is it connects student reporters with local publications. So as I'm sure your viewers know, there are a huge loss in reporters and in newsrooms across the country right now. And so Community News Service is there to try and fill that gap by working with student reporters, gives them, on the ground training and reporting, connects them with editors, and then allows for them to start publishing with local publications and kind of like build their clips. So the idea is that it's a benefit for both parties. Students learn a ton by doing this kind of real world journalism, and then publications also benefit by getting some more local reporting sent to them than they might be able to accommodate with like the shrunken newsroom environment that we're seeing across the country.
Sadly and unfortunately. What interested you about writing or specializing in writing about the environment? I mean, it's certainly a fascinating area. There's so many things going on at multiple levels. But was there something in particular that kind of drew you in that direction to follow that as a reporter?
Yeah, so I started out my career in Kentucky, which is my home state, and I was really fascinated by our energy industry. Kentucky is obviously very coal dependent, has historically been a very coal dependent state. And so that kind of extractive industry that existed there really impacted our economy, really impacted our politics, really impacted our culture. And so I was really fascinated by how that industry was changing over time and how it had impacted not only our communities, but also our landscapes. And that's kind of like what first got me interested in reporting on the environment, was largely reporting on energy and sort of like how energy impacts some environmental issues and also obviously climate issues in the world.
Well, that's really interesting. What just to kind of drill down a bit on that for a minute. What is the latest state of the coal industry there in Kentucky and West Virginia and parts of Appalachia historically that have been coal-producing sectors? I mean, is there a sense that, well, this is an industry that maybe has seen better days and is unlikely to see better days in the future? Or is there this sort of defiant culture in play that, hey, we're an important part of the whole workings of the energy situation, and coal mining should be around for a long time. I mean, and the other part of that, of course, is I guess in those states is that jobs in coal mines are some of the best paying jobs that are around, right? If you have a job in the mine, you get very well paid, much more so than I suppose the average worker in some of those states?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say it's sort of all of the above. The coal industry has obviously been declining across Appalachia, largely because of competition from natural gas, which is a much cheaper form of energy to both extract and to burn. Um, and so we've seen a decline in both jobs and in production in, I guess if we're focusing on where I'm from Eastern Kentucky, which is not technically where I'm from, but that portion of Kentucky that mines coal. It's been in decline for a long time, but now we're seeing this new federal administration under Trump pass executive orders like unleashing American energy, for example, that is trying to bring back up sort of these fossil forms of power, so coal, natural gas, oil, and trying to facilitate increased production again. But I think what we're seeing right now is there could be kind of short-term waves of bringing back those forms of energy, but it's not really like a long-term solution to the energy crisis that we're seeing, just because these other alternate forms of energy like nuclear, like renewables, are just so much cheaper than fossil fuels at this point.
Yeah, well, it seems like it's
So
going
yeah.
to, I mean, it has been for a while. It's not really a new story by any means, this tension between traditional energy sources like coal and renewable energy. The whole culture around the mining industry is kind of fascinated me for a while. On the one hand, it seems like there's a dignity to the job, to the work that people seem to feel there. At the same time, there's I get the sense of anger and resentment that companies from out of those states, out of that area, came in these extractive industries, mined the stuff, and kind of when the coal was gone, they left, and kind of that was that. And people were supposed to somehow adjust without any real help or support.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what a lot of workers in that region and in that economy face is they did have a very dignified job and they made, upwards of $80,000 a year, which is far more than like a teacher might make in the state of Kentucky. So they're well-paying jobs, they support families, they support communities, but then when that resource leaves, that job leaves too, and there's not a big replacement. There's also not a lot of support from industry after the industry leaves. So if a coal mine goes bankrupt, there might go your pension as well, and there might go your health benefits. And we've seen a huge rise in a condition called black lung in that region as well, which can lead to like very premature death for very young people without a lot of support for those health conditions. So it's a really complex issue. And I think there's a lot of strong feelings, regardless of like where you lie and whether or not you think we should continue burning coal for electricity. It's a very gray area.
Yeah, and one we still have to work through, I guess. But well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of your recent stories that you've had in VTDigger. One that caught my eye was one you wrote about a farm in Norwich, Vermont, that I guess is struggling a bit at the moment, even when there were certain conservation and education programs that were supposed to help it survive. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that story and kind of how you heard about it and what drew you to it.
Yeah, so I'll say like a caveat for everything I say today is that I am new to Vermont. So I just moved here in early June. I started my position in May. So a lot of the history and some of these stories really predates me. And so I'll do my best to explain it as best I can. But this story came to me actually through my editor who noticed, or one of our editors who noticed that this farm, which probably many Vermonters, if they followed the news over the last decade, are pretty familiar with. It's called Norwich Farm. It is in Norwich, Vermont. And basically this farm has entered foreclosure because of a long tangled history between the farm, the Vermont Technical College, or what was Vermont Technical College, and a land trust called Upper Valley Land Trust. And the essence of this history that is about a decade old is these three parties at one point came together to try to start an dairy education program for the college at this piece of property. And over the years, those relationships sort of fell apart. There was multiple lawsuits, the education program closed, and essentially the family who still lives on this 6-acre piece of property has been trying to keep their dairy going, their creamery going, with the support of the local Norwich community. And unfortunately, kind of the funding for this property has become so big that it is just no longer feasible for this creamery, it seems right now, to continue.
So, do you think they're gonna make it or survive in some way or another, or is it just sort of, doesn't look like it's gonna make it?
Yeah, I guess that's a great question. I wouldn't want to predict myself. I think the family really hopes that they find a financial partner that can help kind of keep this value-added agriculture business going. So far as my last understanding, which was a couple weeks ago, they have not found such a partner. And it doesn't seem like there is a strong path forward for them to remain a financially viable company.
Mm. Well, another story you recently had in VTDigger was about Vermont joining a lawsuit against the Trump administration for cutting $7 billion in solar funds, I guess across several states. I don't think the $7 billion was all for Vermont, but that would be a game changer for sure.
That'd be cool, yeah.
But I guess, can you give us the background of this story and if there's any update on it? Where do we stand at the moment on that?
Yeah, so this story is basically funding that Vermont had from the federal government. Vermont had about $62 million from the federal government, which I've been told would have taken care of adding solar to about 3,000 low-income households in Vermont. I think that's the right number. But it was part of a $7 billion program across the country that would have added, I think, like solar to approximately 900,000 households or access to solar. So this program was cut by the EPA under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that passed on July 4th, cut a whole trunk of funding for greenhouse gas reductions that was passed under the Biden administration in 2022, including the solar program. I think in particular why this program matters to Vermont is one, it's kind of like a political tie. Senator Bernie Sanders was the sponsor for this piece of legislation, the Solar for All program. And so he has been quite vocal about his disagreement with the decision to withdraw this funding. But also Vermont is a state that has, a small population, an aging population, not a massive tax base. And so an influx of federal funding like this is, one, amazing to lower electricity bills, and two, it could have really helped Vermont reach some of its pretty ambitious climate goals in the coming decade. But without that funding, it's a pretty huge loss in what could have been some pretty big solar development projects in the state.
And do we know? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, do we know if those funds are like permanently frozen, or is it just sort of for the time being, or will it depend on whether or not the lawsuit that these 20 state attorney generals filed goes through the court process?
Yeah, so Vermont joined, as you said, about 20 other attorney generals across the country who are suing the administration to get this money back. But Vermont no longer has access to this money. So in August, the funds were frozen, and then in September, they were liquidated. I think around 90% of the funding was liquidated. So Vermont no longer has access to that money. Whether or not it gets that money back in the future is a pretty open question. We've seen that a lot of lawsuits under the first almost year of the Trump administration. And those have gone a lot of different directions depending on what judge sees them. So I don't think there's a clear path forward right now for whether or not Vermont will get that funding back. But obviously Vermont is trying to get that funding back, and the whole state is, most of the state, including the governor, is behind that effort.
I mean, that's a significant amount of money here in Vermont for sure, and I guess that would basically stop that. That was rooftop solar program, I think, if I recall correctly, that Senator Sanders was hoping to boost a little bit. So I'm assuming without that money, that program is just dead in the water.
I have not asked that question directly of state officials about whether or not they're looking for like a alternative source of funding for the program that they were already trying to implement and already getting partners for. But as you said, it's a quite a large sum, and it's quite a large sum for a state like Vermont too. So I don't think there's been any like funder who has publicly stepped in yet to say that they could replace or help support that program without it.
And I suppose given all the other federal funding that's been kind of paused or in question in one way or another, some of it growing out of the government shutdown that we may be seeing almost over with at this point as we're talking today on November 12th, or not, you never know, given the funds that are needed for the food benefits and other things, that probably wouldn't be one that would get up to the top of the priority list, I suppose. Although it'll be interesting to see if that does happen. It's kind of interesting to me because we recently had a visit with Charity Clark, the state attorney general, and she talked a little bit about this lawsuit as well as many others that she has been filing with the against some of the actions of the federal government. So I just was wondering if where that might stand, because it was something that clearly she was very concerned about. The other one I found interesting, and it's a story I think has been going on for a while, about this other farm. I think it's up in Addison County, the Vesterveld farm. This is one I think that has a lot of resonance in a lot of parts of the agricultural community around the state. It wouldn't surprise me that I guess this group of farmers, this family farm, was guilty of, or was accused of allowing pesticides to flow from their farm into Lake Champlain. Is that what was going on there?
Yeah, so this farm has been in the media for quite some time because of a lawsuit from a neighbor that was alleging that they were polluting their property that goes into Lake Champlain, essentially. And so a court did agree with the neighbor, I believe, and in May, the family was held in contempt of court for failing to sort of remedy that pollution. But that is a separate lawsuit from the one that I wrote about in this story, which was actually what is called an intent to sue. So it is a pair of nonprofits filing in the court to let the Vorsterveld farm know that unless the Vorsterveld farm cleans up what they have alleged is pollution into Dead Creek, which then feeds into Lake Champlain, that they would sue in the future. So when I wrote this story, it was at the very beginning. It was when this notice of intent to sue was first filed. And so I haven't spoken to the Vorsterveld farm. I've spoken very briefly to their attorney, and basically the response I've gotten so far is that it is too early to say like what their response to this notice will be. And it is a bit too early to say, according to the Champlain Valley Farmers Coalition, what a notice of intent to sue of this kind could have on the farming community in Vermont. But I think generally these kind of allegations of pollution against agriculture in the state is obviously very tense. And I think it will remain to be seen kind of like how the farm responds and how the farming community in general responds.
Yeah, because I know this was a complicated issue and goes back, as you say, a ways. I mean, a lot of farms seem to be struggling with the idea of how to balance their need to fertilize their property with the runoff that would then flow into lakes or streams and cause issues later on. But this case seemed to be especially kind of dicey for because the farmers seem to be kind of pushing back a bit on it.
Yeah, well, I think the issue in Vermont that I have become aware of for a while is over the Clean Water Act, which is a federal act that the state implements, has permission to implement itself, which other states do as well. But essentially, when it comes to agriculture, there's been an issue over the years where farms do not have to get a federal permit to discharge this waste if they're not considered a CAFO. So right now, there's a couple agencies within the Vermont government that are trying to address this issue and trying to figure out how to better regulate runoff from farms, which, as you say, they use to fertilize their crops, their hay, but can also lead to runoff in waterways that Vermonters frequently use and very much prize. So it's a pretty thorny issue that goes like just, I would say, beyond this specific farm itself.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Well, I was just wondering, are there other sort of environmentally related stories that you're kind of following or thinking about as some possible story ideas? I mean, one I would imagine might be the whole question around flood resilience after the last couple of years of flooding in Vermont, and how to kind of prevent future floods from damaging communities in the way we've seen over the past couple of years. Is there anything you're following kind of on that front that is going to eventually be something we'll be reading about in Digger?
I would say the flooding isn't something that I am in particular following very closely. I have a coworker who is actually following and will be reporting on some very flood heavy stories over the next year. So that is something that like viewers can look forward to for sure, is continued VTDigger coverage on flooding. What I'm looking at more closely right now is sort of how the state interacts with federal changes. So the solar law that we were talking about, the withdrawal of funding, but also like the state was the first to file its Climate Superfund Act in the nation, and that it's called the Polluter Pays Law, and basically, as I'm sure people know, asks large oil and gas corporations like Chevron, BP, ExxonMobil to pay for their emissions between, I think it's 1995 and 2024. So climate science has increased in such a way that we are now able to attribute certain amounts of pollution to certain companies, which is kind of wild. And so that law is been kind of targeted by the Trump administration in a lawsuit, and also lawsuits by other groups as well. And so I think watching how that lawsuit plays out over time will be really interesting. And then I think also looking into the 2026 legislative session and seeing what kind of programs we might look at from an environmental or climate angle that could be pushed forward under the current Trump administration, because the 2025 legislature was pretty quiet on that front. So that's more of what I'm following with my reporting right now, is sort of like how our state is interacting with federal policy, and then also what bigger programs might be coming up next year.
Yeah, well, one of the, you're I've been thinking the same thing. The legislature last year was very quiet on environmental questions. I mean, it was preoccupied, I guess, with education reform or whatever. It seemed to be the big topic. And I'm not sure if in 2026 we'll see the legislature return to environmental issues in the same way they had been, let's say, in the 2024 session. And before that, when we saw a lot more legislation around like the clean heat standard, for instance. Is it your sense also like that we're unlikely to see that be at the forefront, or maybe particularly in an election year, I suppose affordability issues will be a big factor, and that was one argument that was used to slow down the clean heat standard bill. Is that your sense of it as well?
My sense is that, yes, the affordability crisis in Vermont is kind of like the central issue that seems to be driving sort of many conversations in the state, including the conversation around climate and environmental issues in action. I can't say for sure what we're going to see in the 2026 legislative session. As you mentioned, like the clean heat standard was mostly shelved. Cap and trade program around transportation has also been mostly shelved from previous sessions. So kind of these two large scale pushes to lower emissions in our two largest sectors, which are heating and transportation, haven't really gone anywhere yet. And the state is failing to meet, as I think I said earlier, like its climate goals that were under the 2020 Global Warming Solutions Act. So the state is failing to meet goals. It's also failing to pass legislation and kind of also receive that federal support that could work to lower emissions. And so I think, you know, the state will have to address that in some way. And I think that would either look like passing new programs that are working to lower those emissions, or, you know, the other thing I think some legislators are looking at is how to change sort of the guardrails that the state has to answer to when it comes to like its renewable energy standard, when it comes to the Global Warming Solutions Act. There has been more vocal pushback recently against the state having to follow those laws at all. So I would say that's something that I'll be looking at in an upcoming legislative session, as well as not just what's being proposed, but what's being pushed back on and what could change.
Right, right. It'll be interesting to follow that for sure. Well, in a couple of minutes that we have left, I did want to ask you just a little bit about what it was like writing for the New York Times. That must have been a really fascinating experience. I mean, my sense of it is that you know, it's one of the most trusted news sources there is going. The amount of editorial oversight that must go into some of your writing must be very extensive, I would imagine.
Yeah, I had a great time learning and writing at the New York Times. I think you know, it's a environment where you're just within your desk. So I worked a lot with the climate desk, and they kind of became like my mentors and people I would really turn to, not only for story ideas, but yes, to edit, to find sources, to just kind of better like gut check a story idea. So I learned a ton while I was there. It's a very fast-paced environment. I would say there's like a lot of news happening all the time that you're responding to. It's fun in the sense that you have so much access. Like when I was reporting in Kentucky, you know, people weren't necessarily very quick to respond to my calls, but if you say you're calling from the New York Times, you get a much quicker answer, and that was very fun. I would say the same in Vermont, though. I feel like Vermont is a very media-friendly environment, which I really appreciated, and I get, you know, pretty quick responses when I want to talk to people, and so that's been a nice transition to move into VTDigger. But it is great to learn from, yeah, one of the most trusted news sources, especially in an era where we are seeing a lot of questioning of the media and questioning of news and questioning of facts. I very much believe that like journalism is the fourth pillar of democracy, and we do our best to provide unbiased, factual reporting that provides accountability for communities. And I think it was a great place to sort of learn the ropes from people who have been doing that far longer than I have.
Yeah, it is certainly an interesting time. You know, right at a moment, I think historically, when we need trusted sources of information, those are being not only attacked from certain quarters, but also struggling, you know, financially and economically to make a go of it in the internet era, if that's what we're still in. And particularly at the small town local level too, when you hear things like 2 small local papers every week are closing, it's very discouraging. Because that's the kind of information that I think a lot of people rely upon, and it provides a lot of community cohesion as well.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about working at the New York Times is you have a big audience, but that big audience is based on a lot of information you're getting from like the news ecosystem, right? Like I don't think maybe this is too much. I don't think like a group like the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, these kind of big publications we have can really like exist without our local news ecosystem, which is where so many of these bigger stories come from, right? Because obviously, like, a massive paper can't have as many reporters in every state as local newsrooms do. So I think we need a really healthy local news ecosystem in order to like also have a very healthy national news ecosystem. And I feel like that was pretty apparent when I was at the Times as well.
Well, absolutely. Well, I guess we'll have to leave it there, Austyn, for today. But want to thank you very much for making the time for this conversation today, and you know, keep up the good work and everything. Your writing is fantastic, and to all of the viewers out there, if you haven't had a chance to read Austyn's stories in VTDigger, well, now's the time. Anyway, Austyn, thanks again, and thanks to all of you who've been with us. Hope you found the show interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.